So I'm joined by the boys here at Sigma Nutrition and Performance. Thanks for coming on, fellas.
So
maybe if we just start off by going around and talk about what roles each of you is occupying in Sigma Nutrition and Performance.
Yeah, so my name is Gar Benn. I've known Danny quite a long time. I've been on board with Sigma for about 6-7 months now.
Yes.
In about that, yeah. And I'm a coach at Sigma Nutrition. Just day-to-day run-ins, any clients that might come through. Generally myself and Arthur will take care of them. And that's my position.
Okay. So then my name is Arthur Lynch and I'm a more recent member of the Sigma Nutrition team. So I joined about 3 months ago. And my role is more towards the training and performance aspect of Sigma, and whilst I do handle some of the nutrition, my emphasis is more on the training because that's more towards my area of expertise. Okay.
Cool. My name is Danny Lennon. I'm the founder of Sigma Nutrition, essentially a company that looks to put out evidence-based information around nutrition and performance. And yeah, we have a coaching team, including 2 guys, and then we also have a content production side of the company where we put out podcasts, articles, and other forms of media. And that's pretty much it.
Perfect. So the first topic we'll delve into is kind of very topical at the moment, that's weight cutting. So obviously in combat sports, powerlifting, the cutting of weight effectively to make weight classes kind of, whether it's done effectively or done wrong, can have a huge impact on sport performance. So if we take combat sports, first of all, what is the key considerations you should have when optimally trying to cut weight while decreasing performance, while minimising performance decreases?
If we just talk about probably MMA boxing to start, you're really looking at the first consideration is how long between the weigh-in and the fight itself. So typically for most of the pro boxers or the MMA guys we work with, they typically have 24 hours up to 30 hours between the weigh-in and the fight itself. So that leaves a considerable chunk of time where you can rehydrate and refuel them and get their glycogen levels back up. So the actual weight cut is nothing to do with necessarily losing body fat. So I think that's probably one misconception people have. They kind of think of the two things as the one, whereas really a fat loss phase is completely separate, which is done a number of weeks out before the fight. And when we use the term weight cutting, we're specifically talking about that 7 to 8 days before the weigh-in for getting down someone's body weight dramatically through water manipulation, sodium manipulation, and carbohydrate manipulation. So the main consideration people should have to try and get in the sweet spot of cutting as much weight as they can without massively impacting performance is how far away from their weigh-in weight they're going to be. So we typically look at this about 7 to 8 days before the weigh-in. At the most, we want people to be 8% to 10% above that body weight level. Anything above that is going to be too dramatic of a cut, and there's going to be some major impact on performance. It's going to be too hard to rehydrate in the time that people have. So we try and go for about 8%, 10% maybe at maximum, and then from there it's done by how we will restrict water in the days leading up to it. We'll probably do things like a low residue diet to have less waste in the gastrointestinal tract. We'll deplete them with glycogen levels, so that'll take out carbohydrate in the muscle as well as the accompanying water weight. And then after the weigh-in, trying to strategically get carbohydrates back in, fluid back in, electrolytes back in to restore everything and get their body weight back up to previously where it was.
And from a practical perspective, when you're trying to, after the weigh-in, trying to maximise glycogen replenishment, what kind of food sources would you go to achieve this?
Yeah, so the biggest things is we want to stay away from anything that's going to slow gastric emptying. So we want to stay away from any foods that are high in fat, any foods that are high in dietary fibre, and really just want to focus on fast absorbing carbohydrates that they can get in quickly. In terms of food choices, immediately after the weigh-in, we'll always give them a shake that has a powdered carbohydrate so they can get that in quickly. Then from there they can start having regular meals, larger carbohydrates. In terms of food choices, there's no specific foods we go for apart from the fact we wanted to keep it low in fibre again. So because of that, you're looking at really any foods that are high in carbs, low in fibre, low in fat. I tend to get people to look at things that may be deemed unhealthy or highly processed because they're just so much more palatable to eat.
Yeah.
So if you think of these guys, a lot of them, I would have them eating somewhere between 700 and 900 grams of carbohydrate over that 24-hour period. If you try and do that just from sweet potato and oats, it's going to be almost impossible to do, right? So that's where they'll include anything from like, say, different types of fruits, but mainly more stuff like, say, even a large bowl of Cocoa Pops and low-fat milk. It's a way that they can really enjoy it, get a large amount of carbohydrates in, on top of their regular shakes, and then they'll obviously have things like white potatoes or pasta, etc., over that 24-hour block.
Perfect. And I'll throw it over to two guys. So from a trainer perspective, obviously if we're going into a state of low glycogen and dehydration, we have to have an effective tapering strategy. We can't have high intensity, high volume sessions just because it's increased injury risk along with the performance factors. So in terms of your tapering strategies, what kind of considerations do you have coming up to the weigh-in?
What would you normally do?
Well, see, the thing is, you're going to be tapering anyway, so it's not going to impact it too much. You know, even if if someone's cutting versus not cutting, the taper isn't going to differ that drastically. The thing I guess, more so than anything else that you need to bear in mind that with the taper, training volumes coming down, so energy expenditure has gone down as well. So you need to factor that in your caloric intake for the day. Outside of that, in terms of like nothing overly drastically, like it's not going to differ too much between someone who has to cut a couple of kilos and someone who's on point with their weight. It's more the nutrition you're manipulating there.
Okay, perfect.
I think it's just to add to that, it's probably the long-term planning comes in as well, where the guys will have a program designed for whether that's powerlifting coming towards a meet or whether it's S&C stuff for a fighter. Based on that and the types of training they're doing, that's where the weight cut itself in terms of how we're going to go about the glycogen depletion will be based on the training program itself. So we'll try and match up that the last or the first day that they start a very low carbohydrate diet is probably going to be the day where they actually have their last high intensity sparring session or a priority session. And then from there afterwards, they're probably going to be doing relatively easy sessions the week of the fight, close to nothing at some stages. And so low carbohydrate diet isn't really going to affect that too much. So we try and plan it based on when the athlete has their last priority sparring session. So there's usually one big sparring session they have before a fight, anywhere between 8 to maybe 14 days out, and we try and find where that is and then work the cut around that.
Perfect.
And then if I can just even add to that again, kind of what you were going at in terms of long-term planning. Myself and Danny had a great talk about this today. We had someone talk to us about they want to cut from 90 trees to 80 trees, right? But overall, that didn't if he cut down to the 80 trees, he'd place a lot higher than he would in the 90 trees. But that wasn't fitting in with a long-term plan, and he's only recently with us. So we just recommended that there was no need to drop into the 80 trees because it would be a pretty severe cut, right? Yeah, it'd be a pretty severe cut the week of, and he'll get way more out of it going into the 90 trees than he would into the 80 trees. So again, you're just looking at long-term planning rather than kind of like, what can I do right now to benefit the most, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And what would you guys say from your experience are the most common or detrimental mistakes people make when it comes to weight?
Probably the first one I would mention there is, as I said earlier, is not being within a certain range that gives them a chance of making it. So for the fighters, guys that have left it too late to cut an amount of weight and they're above that 10% threshold we look for, so they're trying to cut too much weight the week of the fight. Secondly to that is where guys will start restricting their food and their water too early from a fight. So they start dehydrating themselves on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and the weigh-in's not until Friday or Saturday. So they're in a dehydrated state for 3 to 4 days. So what we try and do is the most dehydrated the fighter should be for as short as time as possible. So that's why we'll leave them wait still to cut the morning of their weigh-in. And if they need to get a small bit down that morning, it's not as big a deal for them, someone to go and a fighter to go and step in the sauna to get the last half a kilo off, because the time he's going to be severely dehydrated is only 1 to 2 hours, as opposed to people being dehydrated for a few days. So doing it too far out in advance is probably a big one. Then if we're looking at about powerlifting, something that I know Arthur has probably a lot more experience looking at with different clients that he has, is people that again try and use some of the strategies that I would use for an MMA fighter or a boxer and try and correlate that with powerlifting where they have a 2 hour weigh-in. It's just not going to be the same thing. So maybe you could speak a bit about that, how people have probably a warped sense of what they can do with a 2 hour weigh-in.
Well, the thing there is that if you're comparing a 24-hour weigh-in with a 2 hour weigh-in, which are the two typical ones you see, like things like glycogen resynthesis and rehydration, those are rate limiting. So there's only so much. If you've come in dehydrated, for example, to make weight, and you only have 2 hours to rehydrate, the likelihood that you're going to get back to euhydration is, depending on how much you've cut, of course, it can be difficult. And then as well in terms of muscle glycogen, and those will be. Whereas it's different then with the 24-hour weigh-in, because you've got a good stretch of time to make back that weight and that muscle glycogen. That's kind of the main consideration there.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's a very good overview of weight cutting in sport. And obviously you have the combat athlete weight system coming out soon. Maybe if you'd like to give a cheap plug for that.
Always, every opportunity. So yes, essentially it's basically taking all the work I've done with athletes. So I've done a lot of work with professional boxers, professional MMA fighters, Muay Thai fighters, and it's trying to use that in combination with a more evidence-based approach, which is probably not all that common in a lot of the weight cutting information people are coming across online. So it's really not just the weight cut. The whole system will include performance nutrition in general for those fighters in terms of fueling training, recovery after the weight, and then what weight class they should probably go into. So it'll be a system based on manual with a set of guides. There will be video content. There will be spreadsheets for people to work out their own numbers in terms of how much water they should be drinking the week of the weigh-in, etc. And all the information is up on sigmanutrition.com.
Perfect. We look forward to that. So obviously, both us at HPA and you guys at Sigma, we come from an evidence-based practice background. But one thing I find, people can get sometimes too bogged down in the science and kind of 100% stick to literature and forget that we have high responders and low responders. So obviously, maybe if you'd like to start off, each is give what you believe evidence-based practice should look like. What is an ideal blend?
I think for me, the way I usually try and get people to think of evidence-based practice is actually based on a really nice diagram that I remember Brad Schoenfeld has used a number of times. Essentially, 3 circles as a Venn diagram, the 3 kind of core components of evidence-based practice. So the first one is obviously the base. What that we want is based on current research, the general scientific consensus. And I mean, that's where some people think, when they hear the term evidence-based practice, thinks we're only talking about, we only take in research only. But on top of that kind of circle, then you have 2 other elements. One, you have someone's personal expertise as a coach and their personal experience in working with people and seeing how different people respond. And then on top of that, the third layer you have is how an individual will react, and them as an individual. So it's taking research as our kind of foundation, but being aware that we can maybe make some allowances and make some changes based on how that person is reacting, and then how we've seen that work as a coaching practice. So to me, those 3 elements are what encompasses good evidence-based practice.
So I think, kind of to follow up what Danny said, so yeah, as a base of the scientific literature, but and this was actually something that I went to a very interesting talk there a few weeks ago by a guy named Ian Jeffries. So he's a Welsh strength and conditioning coach, and he lectures on strength and conditioning. And one of the points he was trying to get across to the audience was that we're given this this notion that knowledge is power. Knowledge is power, and more knowledge, more reading, more knowledge is power. But whereas in reality, application is power, right? So there's no point in having all this knowledge if you can't apply it, right? And then the important thing as well is to understand that with all lines of evidence there are strengths and limitations. So if you take, for example, your scientific literature, if you say, right, I'm adopting this practice because this study here supports it. That study may be a load of shit. You can't just say, oh, I have a reference, and think, you know, we're safe here. You know, so the scientific literature still needs to come under scrutiny, and on top of that, then you can't discount your own practical experience with your clients. So, for example, you know, if you manipulate one variable with a client and you keep everything else the same, and then you find a particular result, that's evidence-based practice, you know, and that's still using a scientific approach, you know, even though it's not, you know, statistically powered, or, you know, it's still an N of 1, but you're still using a scientific methodology with your practice, rather than just going, oh, I found this works well for me, so I'm going to use that with everyone. I think that's kind of what you need to bear in mind. So a blend of using the scientific literature appropriately, and the right blend of your own practical experience, because as David pointed out there not too long ago, that there are individual differences, you know, and then what works for one person and what may be backed up in the literature may not work for another person, because of something else that's going on there. So hopefully that answers that. Yeah. Some shape or form.
Took all the good points. No, the only other thing I could add to that, because the boys have summed it up pretty much like really well there, but the only other thing I can do is, when you do look at current research as a base, to kind of to base anything off of, a lot of time what people can do, as Arthur said, there's kind of a reference for everything, there's a study for everything. People can kind of run into and start second guessing like almost everything they do, you know, so it gets to the point where
paralysis analysis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they end up seeing something that's like, oh yeah, that's a really good point, I will implement that in my training. Then they might start that, and then 2 weeks down the line they might see something that kind of will go against what they have just started into, and then once you got to that point, I'll take it back out of training, or back out of my nutritional program. What ends up happening then is that you're not consistent with anything, right? And it's better to be consistent with something that's not really that evidence-based than to be really consistent and going up and down with what you actually want to do. You know what I mean? So like, no matter what, kind of pick something and stick to that particular point. Don't be chopping and changing the whole time.
And that's what I'd always like to say is, optimal is desirable, but adherable is the goal, essentially. That for any system you put in, you have to be able to, adherence is the main thing that's going to be successful, or that we can design what is physiologically the most optimal diet and training strategy, but it might be shit in terms of how people feel adhering to it. That long-term adherence is kind of the key factor to success with any training or nutrition program.
There you go, spot on.
That becomes even more important with the coaching. There's a great phrase I remember Greg Knuckles had in an article of his where he had physiology only matters when someone is psychologically bought into the process. So kind of this idea that if you're working with a client, it doesn't really matter about the best thing physiologically if they're not actually bought into the whole process of the coaching, and they believe in what you're trying to do, and they're willing and they're motivated to do things. So working on those things with people is probably going to be far more fruitful for a coach than trying to work out every single detail to be like optimized to a certain degree physiologically that someone probably won't stick to.
Yeah, 100%. And a thing like, as you said, Arthur, just because people have a reference for everything doesn't mean they should do it. One example I like to use is HIIT training. There's a lot of research here that HIIT training has higher benefits.
Prime example.
But what people forget is most of our research is 18 to 35 average college male. If you have a 60-year-old man or woman, putting them on for 3-4 Wingates in a row, but you're not going to get them to stick to that.
Not even just that, but I mean, if you have a high-level athlete who's perhaps they want to drop some body fat, and their training volume intensity is already up here, and you give them 2 or 3 HIIT sessions a week, you're just asking for an injury. And you know, so that's where a little bit of the art of coaching rather than just the science comes into it. And another thing as well is that sometimes like one of the strongest effects is the placebo. So as we were saying, you know, if we can get them to believe in the process, it may not be the most scientifically valid, but if they believe in it and they invest all their energy into it, they're likely to get positive results as a consequence.
Definitely, and I think, as you said, when we get too bogged down in evidence-based practice, people can kind of, if something is proved to be placebo, just scrap it and get rid of it. But say we have athletes and they're foam rolling afterwards, even though the literature might be there, and in terms of recovery strategies, foam rolling isn't really all that great. But if they're doing it, and I say if they're doing a recovery strategy and it's not causing them any harm and they think it's working, then as a coach you should have no problem leaving it in when it's not doing detriment to them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Things like that can work as a really good cue to just get people thinking about even recovery. They finish their session, and if they reach for a foam roller, they're immediately thinking about how should I recover now. Not probably translate to later in the day the stuff they do that will actually help recover, right? So it just acts as like a psychological trigger for something else that will be beneficial.
Yeah, 100%. So that's coaching kind of covered there. If we delve back into maybe the science again. So obviously both you and I were involved in a lot of strength-based training and a lot of clients looking to increase muscle mass. So maybe if you'd like to delve in the importance of maybe increasing or maintaining muscle mass as we grow older.
Oh yeah, well it's huge. I mean, loss of strength, loss in power, loss of muscle, increase kind of exponentially once you hit a certain age, and just the ability to hold on to that muscle has been shown to be a significant predictor or protector, if you like, against things like falls, fractures, protects sort of cardiometabolic health, and then just maintaining independence as well, So I mean, if you fall and break your hip and you're brought into a home, you're not independent any longer, and Brendan Egan has done some very good work with that up in UCD. Some of the anti-sarcopenic programs, and even just primarily just bodyweight exercises, so they don't necessarily need to go to a gym if that's something that intimidates them or is still not sort of culturally accepted amongst the elderly. Just at home bodyweight exercises, push-ups, squats onto a chair, split squats, these kind of things, they'll all help maintain muscle mass in the major muscle groups, and ultimately help reduce the likelihood of those kind of injuries or preventable diseases occurring.
Perfect. I'll go to you in a minute, Gar, and we'll discuss programming and coaching considerations for the older athlete. But maybe if you'd like to delve in first, Danny, the kind of metabolic advantages of maintaining high levels of muscle mass as we age.
Yeah, so as Arthur said, I think Brendan Egan's group at UCD have done some really cool stuff. I think one of the studies that he actually did, that you were just talking about there, was they took, I think, over 60s, and even in 6 weeks, they'd given them like 30 minutes of a workout just with their body weight 3 times a week, so something very, very low level, 30 minutes 3 times a week. Within 6 weeks, they had like increased muscle mass by 3%, which is considerable when you consider the type of training they're doing in that short period of time. And so not only can you see improvements there, but from purely like the metabolic side, it's not just actual muscle tissue and helping bone. Like Arthur mentioned, there's cardiometabolic issues. We're seeing links to all sorts of chronic illnesses, diabetes, obesity, so sarcopenic obesity is huge, cancer, and even if you look at death risk, there's a really cool paper from, I think it was Ruiz, back maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It was in the British Journal of Nutrition, or the British Medical Journal actually, and that they had stratified over 60s into 3 groups. One's deemed low, average, and strong. So on a level of strength, so strength tests. So they're either weak, average, or strong. And the third of the population that were in the strong group had half the death rate of the people in the weak group. So it's like having one of the main predictors we have for mortality is strength itself, and then on top of that, muscle mass. And so like Arthur said, if you look at the average statistics, like the rate at which people decrease muscle mass over the years is actually quite considerable. I think it's somewhere like maybe 3 to 5% or something per decade, something quite big.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the figure offhand.
And if you look at athletes who have trained and stayed training, particularly resistance type training, well into the later years, like 70, 80 years old, you can see in certain case studies where they've actually maintained the same muscle mass as people in their 30s. So it's not that this rate has to be there, that it can be mitigated, and so there's a number of strategies. Number one, resistance training, and then you look at things like obviously overall protein intake. There's a lot of research now on protein distribution across the course of the day, and then obviously a lot of the strategies that I know, Arthur, you've been looking at in terms of potentially things like HMB or fish oil, how they can maybe have a role in the future based on the future research. So yeah, it's a really exciting area, but it has a huge impact for all sorts of health issues.
Yeah, definitely. And with our aging population, I think behind obesity, sarcopenia is probably going to be the big social problem we're going to deal with going ahead in the future.
And just on that, I might add, I was involved with a study about just over 3 years ago now, actually, in which we had elderly female participants, and all we were doing with them was 3 times a week, provided they showed up, just TheraBand exercises. So it could be squats with a TheraBand, calf raises, split squats, push-ups off their knees, and even that would seem to be, quite entry level or quite basic stuff, or you might even think TheraBands are of no use. And I would have been of that belief going into the study, but you would be surprised, in conjunction with the protein feed, significant changes in lean muscle mass over the course of about 12 weeks. So, again, just bringing back to that, doesn't necessarily, if a gym is something that intimidates you, there are other options for you there, and stuff you can. The advantage of those as well is you can do them at home.
And then from a coaching perspective, practical perspective, what considerations do you have for anyone that may be involved with older athletes or older age population?
I suppose the 2 ways you'd kind of have to tackle it from is simplicity and recovery, right? Just off the top of my head, what I'm thinking here is like, even what Arthur said, he said, we had an elderly population, and 3 times a week when they showed up, right? So the first thing you have to look at is simplicity, like, is someone willing to jump in their car, drive 15 minutes to half an hour to a gym, go in, do a program that's strictly outlined? Probably not, so it has to be quite simple, straightforward to implement, and possibly with some, you'd hate to kind of say, but possibly some sort of hook, so something a little bit fun or something that's a little bit enjoyable to make someone willing to want to participate in it. And then the opposite side then is when you have to look at the recovery side, because again, if this is someone in their 60s or 70s, you don't want to be absolutely destroyed the day after, like 2 and 3 days in a row. So it has to be something that's of an appropriate volume in the session, that the next day that they wake up, it has had a huge benefit on everything, but they haven't destroyed themselves for the coming days. So I suppose that'd be the 2 angles that you'd have to work for that.
Perfect. And one of the debates we hear when we talk about building muscle, and not just for an older population, and that is, should cardiovascular or cardio exercise be a component of a strength and muscle building program? So if any of you would like to take a stab at that question.
Do you want to shoot first?
Yeah, I've gone over and back with this one about 20 times, and even just yesterday, just chatting with the clients, 2 clients actually. So one of them was saying to me, so when you program sets of 6 reps in squats, I'm really out of breath, like more than my judging by my actual strength than I should be. And the guy beside him says to me, and this is highly anecdotal, I know, but he says to me, I was like that as well, and then I started doing the rower at the end of every session, just for 5 minutes after the end of every session. I've no problem anymore. So in that scenario, and then I thought about it a little bit more, and I'm like, okay, so this guy only comes in here to train 3 times a week for an hour, and he sits down for the rest of the week, virtually, pretty much, so like very low level of activity outside of that. So in that scenario, a little bit of aerobic activity may be of benefit. So it may help them have the aerobic fitness to complete high repetition sets, or might help them recover a little bit better between sets, so help clear some of the metabolic byproducts that are produced as a result of the exercise. But if it's someone like a high level powerlifter who's going to be taking between probably 3 and maybe even 10 minutes between sets for like really intense, like in terms of percentage of their max lifts, then I don't really see how it could make a substantial difference in terms of improving their muscles' ability to produce more force. It really does depend on the individual. The other thing as well to bear in mind is that so I actually did a mini review of the literature on concurrent training about 2 years ago for my final year project in my degree. And kind of one of the conclusions I came to is that, like anything, the devil is in the dose. So if you go out for a jog maybe once or twice a week, and you're not training your lower body then again until maybe 2 days after that, and that jog is of a fairly low intensity, that's unlikely to interfere with your strength gains, unless you're really, really high level, in which that extra training volume could just push you over the edge into like overreaching, or maybe just dabbling with a little bit of overtraining or under recovering. But if it's like three lower body intense weight training sessions a week and 3 high intensity interval sessions on the other days of the week, that may not be the best thing for you, or even just going out running like after every weight session. At some point there's going to be an interference there, but it does kind of depend on the dose and depends on the level of the client or the athlete.
The way I tend to look at it is just on kind of a spectrum of probably taking the pros and then the cons of aerobic training. If we're talking about is it of benefit to a strength athlete, and looking at the pros and cons and then using them as 2 ends of the spectrum, and then as usual what we end up finding is probably somewhere in between, right? So the pro of adding in more cardiovascular training, like Arthur said, is probably that you can increase someone's work capacity, right? If they never do anything and they're completely unfit, getting some more aerobic work in allows them to have more work capacity or the ability to do more work. So improving that is actually going to be a good thing. So you want to move them from here and get them up this way. But the further you move in that direction, then you run into the problem of, like I say, interfering with their training. So is the extra session they're doing impacting the actual priority session they have of being able to recover or do enough volume in actual lifting? And if it is, then it's probably too much. So somewhere in between those 2 things is where you're looking at. And as long as it sits in that sweet spot, you're probably okay. And then in terms of where that sweet spot is, it probably depends on the athlete, right? So like if it's someone like Arthur who's doing a ton of volume at a very huge numbers already, the window he has to include more sessions is going to be considerably lower than someone who's generally lifting a few times a week with moderate strength goals that's doing it more just for general body composition. Yeah. They have a bigger window to fit more stuff in because they're not as focused on a specific goal, whereas any tiny decrement to performance in one session for Arthur is a much bigger deal, right? So there are just a few of the pieces of context of where it is, but it shouldn't in and of itself impact, if we're talking then about muscle building, which I think is another component to it, purely ability to build muscle, it shouldn't impact that, provided that the extra calories you're expending are made up for by more calories coming in. So that shouldn't, just running alone, this idea that running alone is going to make your muscles drop off is just incorrect, because we know people that are big and jacked that run. So it's just the more you run, and you obviously have to be able to counteract that by increasing caloric intake. So anything to add back to that?
Well, I guess just a nice analogy that I've heard about it and that I like is that so aerobic training, it's not like a light switch that you just flick on and the light comes on. It's more like a dimmer switch, right? So you turn the dial and the intensity of the light increases. It's sort of that's more so what's going on. So a little bit of aerobic training would be a fairly dull light, and then high volumes, a much brighter light and much more interference. Yeah, Danny tends to illustrate points an awful lot better than I do.
I'm just taking all the smart stuff
Yeah.
you say and just repeating it in a different way.
I think when we're dealing with a general population, I think it's good to keep in mind that if someone's willing to give up, say, 3 hours a week to structured exercise, they're probably better off doing a strength-based muscle building program in those 3 sessions, and then just living a generally active lifestyle. Maybe if you'd like to hone in on the importance of NEAT, maybe explain what NEAT is and how the impacts having higher levels of NEAT can have on your health.
Yeah, sure. So when it really comes down to, again, we're just discussing energy balance, and we have calories in, which is pretty obvious. We have calories out, and so the calories out, which is our energy expenditure. There's different components of that. Obviously, your trained programming or training sessions are going to expend energy. Your resting metabolic rate, the thermic effect of feeding. But then the other component you mentioned is NEAT, which is non-exercise activity of thermogenesis. So it's essentially activity that you're doing that's not actually programmed exercise or conscious going and being active. So it could be as simple as things like fidgeting or moving about a bit, shuffling. It could be from people who work standing up as opposed to sitting down. It could be just movements of walking over to the bin to put something in and coming back. Like stuff that will add up over time, that's adding more caloric expenditure, that's not actually planned exercise. And so the relative importance of NEAT is that it can actually contribute far more than people imagine. So people think like, oh, that's not going to add up to a whole lot. Over the course of 24 hours, done every day, it actually adds up quite considerably. And actually you see that as the kind of main thing that will explain differences in how predisposed some people are to gaining weight, say, after they come off a diet, or how much people lose when they start dieting, is how much their NEAT levels adapt up and down. So our body will try and adapt these upwards or downwards based on our changes in caloric intake, and some people have a different adaptation level to that. And so we see that people who have generally lower levels of NEAT have more possibility to, say, become overweight and obese when they're overeating by a certain amount, as opposed to someone who's, when they overeat slightly, they compensate by ramping up their NEAT levels. So yeah, NEAT can have a considerable impact on how much calories someone is going to expend. And so therefore, just people, it's something to be aware of, that getting in extra activity throughout the day is important. And so just for a very practical level, the way I try and get people to think of it is not just of people rating themselves as active because they train every day. So it's like, oh, I'm a very active person, I go to the gym every day of the week. But they're in the gym for 1 hour, and then for 23 hours they're sitting down. So they're actually a sedentary person who does a bit of activity. So instead of thinking of it just in that terms, there's even groups that are starting now to try and rate stuff on how active people are on certain intervals across the day. So I was talking to a nutritionist recently, Jeff Rothschild, and he was talking about this idea where they've had people look at as low as 15-minute blocks, all segments across the day, in how many of those are you actually up and moving, and then trying to use that as a better gauge of how active someone is, as opposed to saying, yeah, I did 2 hours of activity, but that could be a 2-hour burst and the rest of the time you're sitting down. So it's probably more important to think about, yeah, doing your general training, but outside of that, regularly being active, even if it's a 5-minute walk, a few times of that throughout the day, that has a huge impact.
I think from a practical perspective, one of the big things we often hear is people like, I don't have time to exercise. But say for the typical office worker, just how you would implement that practically is everyone takes phone calls, say, on their mobile now, that instead of doing it at the desk, if you're on a 10-15 minute phone call, there's no reason you can't walk to the shop or something back while taking that phone call. Or even everyone that works in the office, they all have a lunch hour, that lunch hour shouldn't be taken sitting at the desk. That if people go and walk for 40 minutes at that lunch hour, when they get home they've already 40 minutes of what is actually structured exercise, but what they don't see is a big burden, and when they go home in the evening they're even freedom.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. We've done that. So we've probably worked with a lot of people who have the same issue of just general lack of activity.
Yeah, there's a really interesting guy I took on recently. His name is Ross. Really cool guy. He came in, he was overweight, wanted to lose some weight, and we got talking from day one, and I've never had someone apply everything as much as this man has. Like, he's literally taken every single thing we've said on board. And two of the biggest things for this, right? We'll just exclude this, but it was pretty crazy. He was drinking like 8 cappuccinos a day, so that was outrageous amounts of calories coming in. But other than that, we'll go back to Neat. He gave up driving to work. He drives, he cycles his bike 10 minutes to work in, 10 minutes to work out. He makes conscious decisions to take stairs instead of lifts. Now I know these are only silly little things, but as we said, when you account these things over a full day, they have really, because like we're only in training 3 to 4 times a week because he's a busy guy. So depending on his schedule, these things are adding up like day after day after day, and the results have shown like anyone that's seen this guy in recent times is just saying like, where's the other half of you gone, you know? And it's just from his general movement throughout the whole day that's been achievable.
Brilliant.
Like half of Sam.
Yeah, Sam's another guy as well. Yeah, exactly.
So it's just about, as you said, and Danny, you were always alluding to it, it's about building strong habits and reinforcing them going through. And I'd like to talk there about a beginner. So one question that a listener actually put into me was, how do you guys treat an absolute beginner with no prior experience? Say they walk into the gym and want to take up powerlifting. How do you guys approach them as an absolute beginner? Because as coaches and most things, we always talk about programming for the elite, for the very advanced. But for a coach with no one with zero knowledge or experience, how do you approach them?
What you do the beginners, so
Do you want me to lead with it?
yeah, go through it and what you normally do.
Well, the first thing is to screen their movement. That'll be, above all else, the most important thing, is if they can't move safely and efficiently, you can't load them. It's just not, it's unethical to do so, right? So the great thing about the power lifts and a couple of other of the assistance moves, shall we say, like the overhead press, push up, things like that, they're exercises that we'd use in a training program, but they're also movements that we can use to screen people. Right, so if someone can perform a squat with a stick on their back to full depth, their knees, so the middle of their kneecap tracking over the middle of their foot, maintaining a neutral spine, those sort of things, then you're sort of safe to progress them, if you like, right? Same with, for example, like an overhead press. So if their overhead position looks like this, then they might have a few tight muscles that need to be elongated slightly. And then if you do have someone who's lacking in some movement, then it's to troubleshoot whether it's a motor control issue, a mobility issue, a stability issue, or sometimes just an awareness thing. So sometimes if someone can't maintain a neutral spine, when you give them a stick and get them to perform a hip hinge movement, similar to a deadlift position, if they can't maintain a neutral spine, sometimes if you actually just bring them over to a mirror, get them into the bottom position and tell them to look in the mirror and then say, look, can you see that position there now? Because sometimes it mightn't compute in their head, but if they learn better through visual cues, then that might work better for them. And then once they've got the position down, you take away the mirror and then you get them to understand the feel of the right position compared to where they were. And then that's kind of the main thing, really. And then it's just understanding their goals, whether it's more body composition or more performance based. And other than that, really, it doesn't differ too much. Then there'll be some differences in the programming and whatnot, but other than that, I'm not sure anything to add to that, Gar? Or?
One thing I would say is that, and you probably can touch on this more, is the outside of just the training and the screening, is the actual relationship between the coach and the client, which is one thing I think that particularly in here is a big deal made of, and actually you see it play out all the time of the atmosphere that people have here to train, and then the way they work with the coach. And so I've known a lot of people that came here who have previously not been people who typically enjoy training or going to the gym, and so they may have previously given up on that type of thing, but because of how the coach works with them and talks through stuff with them, and just in general, even outside that, just makes things enjoyable and the place fun to be around, that can allow people to actually want to come to the gym. So like we even know, like with Sarah, someone who's never really been into training, is now coming in 4 times a week and loves coming in. So maybe you can go through how that kind of relationship
so like there's one thing I'm going to come back to environment and coaching relationships, but there's one really cool thing that I think applies to beginners as well, is always having some sort of PB in a session. Right now, I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but like maybe it's like a mobility PT. Someone starts off and they can quarter squat, and you find that there's something going on there, and you address those issues. All of a sudden, someone is squatting below parallel, and you make somewhat of a big deal about that. Then, for someone, that's really exciting, because, like, let's be honest, for all of us sitting here who practice squat, bench, deadlift day in, day out, if you say that, hey, I'm going to add however many kilos to your total at the end of the month, that's sexy. You know, you're fucking hyped about that. You're like, this is class. I'll have an extra couple of kilo. And like, look how excited he's getting. He's like, fucking yes. He's flexing and everything. So, you know, that's exciting for us. You know, but there's a very competitive element to everything with us. But when no one is, or say when someone comes in and they're not essentially competing with anyone except themselves, as cheesy as that sounds, well, then you have to give them some sort of PB element to nearly every single session to kind of keep that novice stimulus there for quite a while, you know? So then they start really enjoying the session, and then they're bought into the training system itself, then they enjoy it. Then the idea of 2.5 kilos a month or whatever you get, that's sexy to them then, once they've got to that point. But there's kind of that initial buy-in that you have to get first. And in terms of, what did you talk about there? Environment and coaching relationships. Yeah, so the more that you bring
fun, really, in general.
Exactly. Yeah. If you come in and like you're super serious, arms crossed, like, yo, today we're fucking squatting, you know, squat. Like, that's not enjoyable for anyone. So that kind of comes back to what we were talking about a while ago, is that like it becomes a huge personal relationship, and that trumps everything for quite a while at the start. So someone that comes in initially, they get to know everyone. There's some nights you come in, there isn't an inch of space on this floor. Everyone's getting to know each other, get to know their coaches, and like that's what I built City Gym on as a whole. Like, people getting to know each other, having that sense of community and family in it, and then people really start to enjoy the training, and then they get serious about it. So I think that would kind of tie in how a beginner would start, how we'd look over them, and then how they would progress. And that goes the same online when we're dealing with people with Sigma. Is that in the first couple of weeks, what we have is like daily emails, or if someone needs it, a call. And what you find is that at the start, people need consistent email, like consistent feedback, and it's almost like you have to hold someone's hand to begin with. But then once you see a few weeks into the program, they're out on their own, they know what they're doing, they're familiar with the way that you're running a program, or that you might coach a program, they're familiar how your systems are set up and how they work. And then they're bought in and they enjoy it then from there on. So I actually forget who said it. There's a really nice saying that you almost have to trick someone to help them. And I like that, because it seems somewhat devious, but when you think about it, is that you're kind of tricking someone out at the start and kind of say, hey, come in, like, you know, do this and it's fun. But then once they actually get into it, they really enjoy it. And I think that's what it's about.
It's coming back to what we said earlier on, is that, like, to placebo them apart from anything else, you know?
Yeah.
Get them to buy into the process.
Because again, you know what can help someone, and they might not, like, just because of like don't want to go down the route of the man in the media and stuff, but like from what they see in media, people might not believe that this can work. You know, like for example, if you see a headline of some sort, like lose however many pounds in however many days, if you tell them, yeah, that's great and all, but our process will be a little bit slower, but it'll be effective, that's not as sexy. You know, and that's a term that we use a lot, like, you know, sexy, because like it has to borderline somewhere between sexy and achievable, you know.
I was talking about that thing the other day, just while we're on that topic of people having this misconception maybe that they need to be sweating or panting coming out of the session.
Yeah.
So you can essentially, instead of trying to say, oh, don't mind that's nonsense to a beginner, what it's easy to do is like, program their proper strength stuff there, get them moving properly, and then like the last 5 minutes of a session, give them something that's probably going to give no real major training benefit, but it's going to get them panting and sweating, so when they leave, they're like, that was a really good session, right? So you're giving them a little bit of what they want, and then the rest of the time actually giving them stuff they need.
Yeah.
So as opposed to trying to go against what people feel that they want, I think
that's brilliant. And I suppose that kind of even loops back to your last question about, sorry to be looping back now, where you're talking about like cardio and stuff like that when it comes to strength training. Like that it is ingrained in us as a nation that, like, you know, outrunning the roads, like that's good for you, that's exactly what you need. And as we're saying, that's probably not what people need at all, and that's the point you made. So it's kind of trying to coach people out of that as well, that idea of like, you need to be sweating, you need to be running like huge distances and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, and I think by making that good coaching environment, that enjoyable environment, links back to what we were talking about earlier about adherence is key. And if we don't make that environment in the early stages of any program, it won't be adherable.
Why would you come back? That's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so we're coming up on time. Kind of feel like yourself now, Danny. So before we get to the final question, if you guys like to go individually and tell people where you can get your own plugs in, where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. So basically for me, everything is Gar Benn _CG for City Gym. That's on my own personal Twitter, Instagram, everything like that.
Perfect.
Okay. So either just Facebook, Arthur Lynch, Instagram, Arthur Lynch. Just keep it simple. You can
so straightforward.
Or you can even email me, whether you prefer arthur.lynch@ul.ie or arthur@sigmanutrition.com. Okay. And actually, Danny made that email, so I might have made it a little bit.
Do you
want to
elaborate what your previous email was?
Which one?
The lunch.
Oh yeah, you could also find me at arthurslunch@gmail.com. Right?
Brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're interested in powerlifting coaching, online nutrition and performance training. One of those emails will be best. Or if you're interested in following me as a lifter, probably Instagram, probably the best medium to use.
Cool, yeah. For me, just go to sigmanutrition.com. The podcast, just type in Sigma Nutrition Radio, Danny app, and then social media, I suppose, Danny Lennon _Sigma Nutrition on Instagram. And that's pretty much it.
Perfect. So again, feeling like yourself, the final question that I ask people on show, I don't know if I asked you guys when you were on, I don't know if I'd come up with that time, and that is, what is the biggest mistake that you have made that has changed the way you approach your mindset or your career in general?
The biggest mistake I've ever made is having too much pride, not outsourcing something right from the get-go if I needed to get more information. You know, just trying to gather all the information myself consistently. Like, for example, when I think everyone can relate to this that's ever lifted, you try lifting yourself for years and you get absolutely nothing from it. Then you learn about it or you get a coach and all of a sudden everything just accelerates. Yeah, so just put the ego away, put the pride away, and just ask someone for help.
Mistakes, how long have you got? So, it's been so many. Probably, I would say, are we talking about it as a powerlifting coach or as a personal trainer?
Or just in life, yeah?
In life,
yeah. Just in life.
Approach it whatever you like.
Oh God.
Not eating more gelato at a younger age.
Yeah. Okay, if we maybe bring it back to maybe a few years ago when I was bodybuilding, and probably one of my biggest downfalls was probably being overly obsessed with the minute details and kind of losing focus of losing sight of the bigger picture, and not getting my priorities right there. So I could be sweating about getting the perfect timing and distribution of my meals versus actually just hitting my macronutrient targets for the day, or getting my rest periods between sets in the gym absolutely perfected, rather than focusing on the progressive overload and actually the performance and the execution of the exercises. Probably that, I would say. Yeah.
For me, it was probably for a long time not critically thinking properly, or thinking out as being critical of my thinking, but not proper scientific thinking and analysis of what people were saying, and perhaps giving some people a bit of a free pass with the information they were giving because either they communicated really well or they seemed like a nice person, which is a really common one now in fitness we were talking about earlier, or people that just seem to have genuinely trying to help people, and the information sounds good and is put across, especially when it's quite emotive, like when people write a lot of the books people see on nutrition, talking about how they've been kind of conned by the food pyramid, and this is the way we're eating, and this is suddenly going to change the world now, and it all sounds logical and makes a lot of sense, but not really critically thinking about some of that stuff, and thinking it the way that a scientist should, and just believing that I was critically thinking about stuff when I really wasn't. And so when I really started to look at true potential mistakes people can make when they're trying to analyse stuff and not do things scientifically, and start really paying attention to it, that's when a lot of the stuff changed. So that's how I go with it.
Brilliant. So thanks so much for hosting us tonight, guys. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Pleasure.
So do I.
Yeah, it's great.
Really
Yeah.
good.